I've been a truck driver for the past decade and a half, and I have to admit, I've seen some insane shit while on the road. But at the top of my head, there are two incidents that I always tell people when they ask me what's it like to be a truck driver. The first incident happened when I was a year into this profession, and I'd been given a new route to drive. Most truck drivers prefer to drive at night, and I wasn't an exception to this. I had to carry some oil from one state to another, and it was going to be a longer haul than I was used to driving. My manager told me I should speak to a certain senior driver before I drive this shipment, as he had experience driving on this chain of highways. Mr. Sims had been with the shipping company for years, and when I told him I was about to drive this route, he looked tense. Back then, I was barely 20, and I didn't have much experience in life. "Listen, son, it's a 500-mile journey, and as you leave Montana, you'll have to drive on a four-sted road for about 80 miles. No matter what happens, don't stop on that stretch, and if for any reason you have to stop, whatever you do, don't get out of the vehicle." It spooked me, to be honest, but I didn't question him. The next night I began driving, and around 2 a.m. I started driving on that stretch of highway that Mr. Sims had warned me about. I had the radio on as I went deeper into the woods. The radio signals became weak, and after a certain point, all I could hear was static. I switched off the radio and focused on the road. I had some coffee at a gas station before, and I knew I was fully awake. Around the 30-mile mark on this forested highway, the radio connection started to fluctuate on and off with static in between. This is pretty common on these roads, so I chose to ignore it and just keep my focus on driving. That night it was pitch black, and not even the moonlight was shining on the road ahead. Just as I was about to take a sip of water, I saw something ahead of me step onto the road. Animals often, wolves, bears, and sometimes even deer, cross highways all the time, so I didn't really think much of it. But as my truck approached the animal, I observed something very odd about it. It had stepped from the tree line and was currently trying to cross the highway. As my vehicle was about to pass it, I saw what it was, and it shook me. There, in the middle of the highway, stood a moose. It was more than 6 foot tall and just as wide, but its size wasn't what shocked me. It was the fact that it didn't have a head. It walked slowly, crossing the highway at its own pace, and blood was dripping from its neck where the head was supposed to be. As I passed the decapitated animal, it was clear that someone or something had cleanly chopped off its head. I was so petrified that I stepped on the gas and crossed the rest of the way, praying to God. I still couldn't justify what I'd seen, and my mind just thought it was some kind of hallucination. I had seen the animal for only a minute or so, but the image wouldn't leave my mind. Finally, when I met Mr. Sims again, I told him everything that I saw that night. He sighed and told me that that part of the woods was infamous for witchcraft and occult practices. A lot of people witnessed such things there. He himself had seen scary stuff driving that highway, but he said the best thing I did was to keep driving. The second incident is fairly recent. It's about a year old or so, but it still scares me to my core. This was back in October when it began to snow. I was scheduled to drive a small route, less than 200 miles. However, I had to drive mostly in daytime as the shipment was to be delivered soon. I never made it a habit, but once in a while, I gave a lift to hitchhikers. I know, the dangers of allowing some random person into your vehicle, but sometimes I really do end up helping people in need. This one time, an elderly man was sitting by a highway holding his thumb up. He had a duffel bag on his shoulder and wore normal clothes. Something in me just told me to help this man. I stopped my rig and looked over the passenger side door. "Where you headed, sir?"
"Oh, I just need to get to Chicago, son,"
he said, grinning at me. "I'm going there too. Hop in." I opened the passenger side door for him and he climbed inside. He settled in and I resumed driving.
"Where are you from, son?"
"I'm from a small town called
Aurora. Am I right?"
The man completed my sentence and laughed, and was surprised that he knew where I was from. We began chatting, and as the man spoke, he began to reveal more and more things about me. With every passing minute, I was growing skeptical of this person. Was he stalking me? Was he a serial killer? How did he know so many things about me? We still had a few miles ahead of us till we reached Chicago, and I decided to be quiet and alert. The man must have sensed my unease, as he got quiet too. I had been newly married back then, so I hoped this man didn't know about my wife Jessica. Hours passed, and we could see the city lights in the distance. I was relieved that we were closer to our destination, which also meant I could get rid of this man. But as soon as that thought crossed my mind, the man spoke.
"Stop the rig."
So I slowed down my vehicle and stopped it near a bus stop.
"My journey with you has ended here, son, and I hope you become a great father. A little angel is about to enter your life. Drive safe. I was here to keep them away and protect you, and my part is done now."
Saying that, he hopped out of my vehicle and walked around it. I was so baffled that I just sat there for a while. Jessica wasn't pregnant, and what did he mean by protecting me? I had so many questions. Then I was surprised by my phone ringing. It was my wife. As soon as I answered the call, she was sobbing on the other end. "Jessica, what happened?" I was worried.
"Mason, oh, Mason, I'm pregnant. I just found out we're going to be parents,"
she told me, and kept on talking. But I couldn't focus on her words. The man knew. I looked out of the window, but the man was nowhere to be seen. How could he disappear just like that? 9 months later, I had a daughter, and the man's words echoed in my mind. I still don't know who he was. Was he my guardian angel? Was he some sort of guiding spirit, or was he a ghost or a demon? Let me know if any of you have had any similar experiences. The internet is full of paranormal horror stories, where people share their real-life ghost stories or unusual experiences. Fearing the dead, we often forget to fear the real danger of the living. This incident occurred in my life when I was around 11 years old. Home life was less than ideal. My foster parents, Garrett and Dina, fought constantly, and my other 3 foster siblings made living there a real nightmare. The only good part of my life back then was Joseph, or Joe as we like to call him. Joe was my best friend, and the only person who truly saw how miserable I was. His parents, Linda and Jackson, were these loving people who always welcomed me into their home with open arms. You see, while I had to share not only my toys and books, sometimes I even had to share my clothes with my foster siblings. Joe's life was the complete opposite of mine. He had his own room, his own toys, and even his own computer back then. His house was a beautiful Victorian home, which was bought by his parents around the time of his birth. He had almost everything I didn't. We both knew it, but Joe always tried to share with me as much as he could. When my foster parents fought too much, or when my foster siblings were being extra annoying, Joe used to welcome me to stay at his house. Spending time in his home was like going to the candy store for me. I had a nice makeshift bed beside Joe's. His mom would make sure we always had dessert after dinner. I got to watch all the animated movies I wanted. Those were the nights when I slept without fear or sadness in my heart. But everything changed this one fateful night. Joe and I were in our beds as usual. His mom tucked us both in and shut the door. Joe and I spoke for a while, and eventually we both fell asleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a weird scratching noise. At first, I thought it was morning and Joe's mom was vacuuming outside our door. But when I looked around, it was still pretty dark. The LED watch beside the bed said it was around 2 a.m., So, what was making that noise? I squinted my eyes and tried to navigate the room in the dark. That's when I saw a figure. It was standing right outside our room's window. It looked like a tall, slender man who was prying open the window to our room. I was so scared that I didn't even dare to wake up Joe. I just closed my eyes and hid underneath the blanket. The next morning, when I tried to tell Joe and his parents what I'd seen, they told me that I'd just had a nightmare. Although I didn't understand this back then, I see now that his folks thought my disturbed home life was resulting in me having nightmares. But I was sure it wasn't a nightmare, as I was wide awake. Joe even made fun of me, so I dropped the subject. A few weeks later, I was once again sleeping over at his home. We had so much fun the whole day that I slept as soon as my head hit the pillow. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to the same scratching sound. I was terrified, but this time there was no one by the window. The scratching sound was coming from down the hall. I gathered some courage and opened the room's door, walking down the hall slowly. Being a Victorian house, the windows were old and big, so before I could reach the main door of the house, I saw the same tall figure standing in the yard, staring at the house. It was pitch black in the house, but the street lights illuminated the silhouette of the figure. As I moved towards the window to see the figure clearly, the figure started slowly creeping toward the house. Fear gripped my soul, and instead of going back into Joe's room, I ran down the hall, pounding on his parents' door. Linda and Jackson woke up, thinking something terrible had happened. But when they saw my tear-stained and scared face by the door, and not Joe's, they were concerned. Linda asked me what had happened, taking me into her arms, and Jackson checked the whole house. When they found their son peacefully sleeping in his room, they knew it was one of my nightmares again. But it wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't one last time either. Through the sobs and hiccups, I managed to narrate the whole incident to them. Both of them were extremely patient and consoled me. Jackson knew my foster parents personally, and he knew how lightly they traded with their kid's safety. So to make me feel safe in their house, Jackson and Linda walked me to their main door and showed me the security system controller. They even told me the code to it, just to make me feel safe. However, that night I couldn't sleep. Even though my personal life hadn't improved one bit, I started avoiding sleeping over at Joe's. He still invited me over every weekend, and I used to deny, giving some stupid excuse. But deep down, I was scared to step into that house again. However, when Thanksgiving and the weekend aligned, I had no excuse not to stay at Joe's. Linda personally invited me, so I went. I enjoyed the holiday with Joe's family, but when it was time to sleep, I was extremely terrified. But Joe's mom, the ever-loving lady she was, read me a nice story, and we both fell asleep. Late that night, I woke up, but not because I heard a scratching or a knocking. I woke because I was thirsty. I walked towards the kitchen, and suddenly I stopped in my tracks. There, near the kitchen table, stood the tall, dark man. He had his back to me, but instead of screaming this time, I just decided to retrace my steps and go to bed. I know Linda and Jackson had enough of my nightly terror episodes. If I were really dreaming, which I knew I wasn't, I didn't want to impose on them. However, when I entered Joe's room, I locked the door, something Linda forbids us from doing for our safety. But in that moment, I was compelled to do it. The whole night I just sat in my bed, curled up, trying to listen to any noise coming from outside. I almost expected the man to come to our room, but nothing like that happened. By the time the first rays of sun hit the sky, my eyes were droopy, and I was ready to just give up. But I knew that until Joe's parents woke, I had to stay alert. That weekend, when Jackson was dropping me off at my foster home, I almost told him what I had seen. It was on the tip of my tongue, but I didn't. I knew they wouldn't believe me and blame my horrible home life for my nightmares. However, since that weekend, I started outright declining Joe's sleepover invites. I was so terrified of stepping into that house, as deep down I knew that that man that I'd seen was real, and he only meant trouble. As months turned into weeks, Joe stopped inviting me and instead started inviting other kids. Our friendship strained due to it, and eventually we stopped hanging out. On the other hand, Dina and Garrett were getting a divorce, and because of that, I was going to be placed in a new foster home. The court proceedings were quick, and within a month or so, I'd packed my stuff and was living with a nice family several towns over. But as I left, I didn't dare to visit Joe and his parents for one last time. Finally, I got the stability I needed, but I still often thought about what I had seen on those nights. Were those real events or just my imagination? As time passed, I started doubting myself, and slowly the events of Joe and my old foster home became distant memories. Years passed, and I was in my final year of high school. I was working as a barista in this high-end coffee shop, busting to take customers' orders, when a familiar face appeared before me. Although he had aged just like me, I could still recognize his face.
"Felix, is that you?"
Joe asked, smiling brightly at me.
"Joe."
I was so stunned.
"Hey, man, long time no see. You sorta vanished from our town."
He looked sad that I just up and left. "You know, it wasn't in my hands."
"I know, but my parents missed you, and so did I."
"You're in town?"
"Yeah, I just started working in the bakery downtown. I heard this place has nice coffee, so I came to check it out."
"Want to grab lunch later?" I asked, hoping he would say yes.
"I'd love to, man."
That afternoon, as we had our lunch, we began talking, each of us sharing how our lives had been. I was genuinely happy to run into Joe after so long. "Joe, I need to tell you something." I finally decided to confess. "I love to sleep over at your place, and I know it's been years, but I swear I saw a man lurking in and around your house on many nights." Joe got quiet, real quiet. He even stopped eating and just stared at me.
"Felix, I need to come clean too. I know what you saw was true because after you moved out, I also saw the man around the house on 2 separate occasions. My parents thought I was having nightmares until my dad returned early from a business trip and caught the man red-handed sitting in our living room. He tried to attack Dad, but somehow Dad escaped. He called the cops and the man was finally caught. Turns out, before we bought the home through a family friend, a man and his family had lived there. They say that in the late 80s, the man experienced a supernatural possession and killed his son in that house. Since then, he's been locked up in a psychiatric facility. But somehow he managed to escape and saw me playing around the house. I reminded him of his son, and he started escaping the facility every night to come visit me. And during his nightly escapes, he had killed several people who had crossed his path. The night when my mom and dad gave you the security code to our house, he was lurking outside the door, and he learned the code too, successfully breaking into our home without triggering the security system at all. He wanted to kill me, Felix. We should have believed you. I mean, he almost killed Dad. After his capture, however, he soon died in the facility. But I never felt safe in that home ever again. So we moved, and the rest is history. I just sat there absorbing everything. So all those years ago, I wasn't seeing things or having nightmares. Chills ran through my heart, remembering how many times I had run into that man at night. I could have been his next victim if I hadn't trusted my gut.
The idea was simple. Ryan and I had a YouTube channel about exploring supposedly haunted places, and Devil's Den had been on our list for months. What people didn't know was that our friend Matt would play the ghost in some stage scares. It wasn't exactly ethical, but the view spoke louder than guilt. We arrived at Devil's Den just before midnight. The rocks loomed under a thin layer of mist, and the air was so quiet it felt like the world was holding its breath. Matt was already there, dressed in a ragged Confederate uniform he'd rented. He gave us a thumbs up before disappearing into the shadows. The plan was for him to appear at the distance, just standing halfway through our shoot. Simple, effective, and guaranteed clicks. Ryan set up the camera while I walked around, narrating the history of the place. We pointed out where soldiers had fallen, where blood had soaked into the rocks. It felt disrespectful, but it was part of the job. As we moved deeper into the formation, I couldn't shake the feeling that the silence was too complete. But I brushed it off. This was supposed to be creepy. We turned off the camera for a break. Matt's cue was coming soon, and we joked about how convincing his costume was. The laughter felt out of place in a spot like this, but we didn't care. At least, not yet. The first scare was supposed to come from behind a large boulder. I called out for Matt to make his move. Nothing happened. He's probably waiting for us to get closer. We edged forward, shining our flashlights into the cracks and crevices. Still nothing. I texted him, but there was no response. Ryan started to get annoyed, muttering about how unreliable Matt could be. That's when we heard it. A low groan. Faint but distinct. Ryan froze, his flashlight shaking. That's him messing with us, right? I wanted to agree, but something about the sound was wrong. It didn't echo the way it should have, not in a place like this. It felt like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I called Matt's name again, louder this time. The groan turned into a series of sharp clicks, like someone snapping their tongue against their teeth. Ryan and I exchanged a look. Let's find him and get this over with. We moved deeper into the formation, calling Matt's name. The further we went, the less familiar the rocks looked. It was as if the landscape was shifting around us. We couldn't find the spot where we'd started, and Matt's laughter, which we thought we'd hear at any moment, never came. Ryan was the first to admit it. I don't think Matt's here anymore. What do you mean? Do you think someone robbed him? No, he would have screamed. I think it was something else. Something else? Like a ghost? Come on, man, we're adults. Okay. Maybe he left for some reason? That didn't make sense. He couldn't have just left. His car was still parked by the entrance. But as much as I wanted to argue, I couldn't deny the growing unease gnawing at me. Then we saw it. A figure standing on one of the rocks ahead, barely illuminated by our flashlights. At first I thought it was Matt, but the way it stood was too rigid and too unnatural. That wasn't our friend. Ryan called out to it, his voice trembling slightly. The figure didn't move. We approached cautiously, but the closer we got, the clearer it became that something was wrong. The figure's face was pale, almost luminescent, and its eyes, there were no eyes. Just dark, empty sockets staring at us. Ryan grabbed my arm. We need to go. The figure tilted its head, as if considering us, before it stepped back into the darkness. We turned and ran, but the path we thought would lead us back to the car only took us deeper into the rocks. The flashlight beams cut through the dark, revealing jagged rocks and patches of uneven ground. My chest burned from running, but I didn't dare stop. Ryan was ahead of me. Behind us, the sound of pursuit grew louder. It wasn't footsteps. It was something dragging itself over the rocks, fast and relentless. I risked a glance back and regretted it instantly. The figure was there, crawling on all fours like some kind of twisted animal. Its limbs bent in ways that made my stomach churn. Ryan tripped and went down hard. I skidded to a stop, pulling him to his feet. Come on, move! We scrambled forward, our flashlights flickering as if the batteries were dying. The path narrowed, forcing us to squeeze through tight spaces between the rocks. The scraping sound was closer now, accompanied by a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Finally, We stumbled into a small clearing. Ryan doubled over, gasping for air.
What the hell was that?
I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. Then the growling stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. I spun around, shining my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. No figure. No movement. Just us and the rocks. We decided to climb one of the larger rocks to get a better view, hoping to spot the way back to the parking lot. The climb was slow. Every surface was slick with moisture. At the top, we could see the landscape stretching out before us. But instead of clarity, the view only deepened my sense of dread. The formation looked different. The rocks seemed to twist and spiral in ways that defied logic. Paths that should have led out were now dead ends. Ryan muttered something about the place being cursed, and for once I couldn't argue. Then we saw movement below. Not one figure, but several. They emerged from the shadows, pale and eyeless, their heads twitching unnaturally. They didn't walk, they glided, their feet never quite touching the ground. Suddenly, Ryan grabbed my arm. We're surrounded. The figures began to climb, their movements jerky but fast. Panic surged through me. We had nowhere to go. Ryan tried throwing a rock at one of them, but it didn't even flinch. The first figure reached the top, and I could finally see its face up close. The skin was stretched tight over its skull, its mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth. It lunged at Ryan and he screamed, swinging his flashlight like a weapon. I grabbed a broken branch from the ground and struck the creature as hard as I could. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a shriek that made my ears ring. Ryan shouted for me to run, but I couldn't leave him. He was swinging wildly at the creatures, trying to keep them at bay. I joined in, using the branch to shove them back. For a moment, it felt like we might hold them off. Then, one of them grabbed Ryan by the leg and yanked him off balance. He hit the ground hard and the creature swarmed him. His screams were cut short as they dragged him toward the edge of the rock. I tried to reach him, but one of the creatures blocked my path, its mouth opening impossibly wide. I swung the branch with everything I had, shattering its jaw. It fell back, giving me just enough time to make a break for it. I climbed down the other side of the rock, my hands slipping on the wet surface. The creatures didn't follow me. Instead, they stayed focused on Ryan, their grotesque forms huddled around him. I didn't look back again. The path was a blur of rocks and shadows. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near a small stream. The sounds of pursuit had stopped, but I still didn't feel safe. I sat there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. When the sun finally rose, I made my way back to the parking lot. Ryan's car was still there, but there was no sign of him or Matt. My phone had no signal, so I drove straight to the nearest police station. They sent a search team to Devil's Den, but they didn't find anything. No bodies, no creatures, just a torn piece of Ryan's shirt caught on a jagged rock. The channel's still up, but I haven't posted anything since that night. Sometimes, I think about going back, trying to find answers, but then, I remember their faces, those eyeless sockets. I know I'll never set foot in Devil's Den again.